We've got this, we have it up here. He's also written a book called The Ship Hits the Fan. So, I'm not sure whether we're going to get onto that one. We will, no doubt we'll find out about it. He's also the master of the steam tug waddle, and he's made a special effort to get here today because he lives up in the bush somewhere, and he's come all the way down to the city to shift the boat, the tug that he was the master of, which is the steam tug waddle, has had to shift to another berth, so he's been up and down all morning. He's made a special effort to get here on time. He's done a great job. So please welcome Rob.
Thank you very much for the invitation to come along and tell you a little bit about my journey through life. My name is Captain Rob Anderson, and I'm a recently retired shipmaster. And I'd just bring to your attention that captain is very much a title. You can be captain of the fire brigade, captain of the cricket club, captain of a whole variety of things. But the correct term on a ship is a shipmaster, it's a master. And there is actually no qualification as a ship's captain. It doesn't exist. You couldn't get one even if you tried. So our title is very much master. And I hold a certificate of competency as a Master Class 1, which is the top level one, which without a few additions is a licence for a ship of any size and any type and anywhere in the world, so it's a pretty good licence to have. I'd just like to backstep a minute and tell you how happy I am to be here, because you may be surprised to know that I grew up in this area before I went to sea. As a little kid, our family home was in Balcombe Road, Blackrock, and then we moved to Beaumaris, like a lot of people did in those days, which was a wild, untamed place, bush place with dirt roads. It was a fantastic place to grow up as a kid. And then I went to sea. But many years later, when I got married, my wife and myself, our very first house was 206 Beach Road, right above the cliff there, which of course I really regret selling 45 years ago. I wish I had it now. But anyway, so I very much consider myself to have a bit of local knowledge, and I'm so very happy to be here. I didn't start, you're not hatched from any special egg as a shipmaster. You start off as a very, like everybody else. My background was very shabby, I'm afraid to say. I wish I could tell you it was a happy start, but I was the sort of kid who would be classified as a rat bag. And I'm sure it'd be an expression that looking around the room, some of you would be familiar with, an old-fashioned expression, but I was very much a rat bag of a kid. My dad was a master mariner. He aspired me to do better things than he did. I actually come from, I'm a fourth generation shipmaster, so it was well entrenched in the family, but he had aspirations that I'd do a bit better. Unfortunately, he was wrong. And he sent me to a very good school, which I recognise now. I didn't recognise at the time. I went to Harvey College in South Road, and it was a total disaster. I loathed and detested every minute of it. And eventually my father gave up in despair, and I think the expression was that I was, as I said, a rat bag, but also I was hanging around with the wrong group. And that was easy for me because I was the leader of the wrong group. So it was a fairly disastrous start. My father eventually capitulated, gave in, and could see that the best solution for everybody was to make me go away. And so I was 15 years of age then, which seems pretty young nowadays. The minimum age to go to sea as an apprentice and things like that was 16. But I could get away as a deck boy on a general cargo ship at 15. And so he took me to 32 South Wharf, this British flag general cargo ship, and dropped me off, quite literally. He slowed down to 5 miles an hour and threw me out the door with my bag and roared off. And gleefully, I suspect, because the problem was solved and everybody heaved a sigh of relief, including the neighbours, the school headmaster, and probably the local policeman. That's now solved. And of course, I thought this was fantastic. I was on my way, and I'd never been any further than Phillip Island, so I wasn't very well travelled, because people weren't very well travelled back in, that was 1965. I joined the ship as the lowest sort of form of marine growth on the ship, at the sum wage of £4 a week, which of course doubled in 1966 because I got $8 because dollars came in and it felt like I was making more money. I didn't really care about the money. I was so intrigued by the life and I fitted into it very well. And I had no aspirations to go any further than being some sort of lowly sailor on deck, if that's what you could really call it. And it took a couple of years before I had the moment of the light bulb moment, and I happened to be working on deck, doing some grubby job down on deck in some foreign port, and I happened to look up, and the master had come out in the morning for his morning walk on the boat deck, and he stood to survey the view, and in his beautiful uniform with the brass buttons and the gold braid. And I can remember so distinctly looking up and thinking, wow, there's only one job to have around here, and that's it. And that was a trigger point for me. All of a sudden I had something to work towards. And I think there'd be probably many people in the room that will reflect on the fact that sometimes you need that jag to get you going. From that moment on, I was on the move. I should have done a lot of study and things like that, but I was having too much of a good time, and I eventually got my sea time in to be able to go for examination as a second mate, master mate, chief mate, second mate of the 3 grades. Having not done any study, I was really behind the 8 ball, and I discovered that there was a school in Wellington in New Zealand that especially catered for people like me. The captain who ran the school, Captain Miller Williams, who ran the school, loved people like us because we were pretty good seafarers. He just needed to shape us and mould us and take the rough edges off us. But I had to get to New Zealand and I didn't have any money, of course. I managed to secure a job as an uncertificated fourth mate on a general cargo ship in Melbourne here, headed for Wellington. And I joined it, and as is customary, I went and knocked on the captain's door to introduce myself, and there was no one home, although I was assured he was on board. And as I turned to walk away, there was an adjoining cabin, we call it a pilot's cabin, a small cabin where the harbour pilot can take a rest. And the door was cracked and there was this big red eye looking at me and smoke coming out through the gap. And I thought, what is this? Anyway, I went to walk away and he yelled out, "Who are you?" And I told him, and he said, do you have a drink? And I thought, well, I probably do, but not at 8:30 in the morning. And anyway, I opened the door, and there was this bedraggled-looking man in a singlet and underpants, and this smoke-filled cabin, and whiskey bottles, more than one. And this turned out to be the master, and he used to stay in there in port, so he didn't make a mess in the captain's cabin, so no one could catch him out. So he said, well, come in, and poured me this big glass of whiskey. And I thought, how am I going to get out of this? And fortunately, he passed out. He collapsed. So I put it down and ran like hell. And I know I'm getting off the point a little bit, but it was such a fun experience for me because I'd never quite seen a master like this. When we went to sail, I went to the bridge, and there in front of me was a man in the master's coat talking to the Port Phillip sea pilot and chatting away. And I thought, I made a mistake. That wasn't the captain at all. This bloke must be. And I went to make a move to stumble out an introduction, and the chief mate grabbed me and said, no. He said, that's actually the chief engineer. He puts the captain's coat on because the captain's too drunk. Anyway, he got away with it. There was a hustle and a bustle and a commotion, and the captain was trying to clamber up the stairs, but mate seemed to fend him off. I got to New Zealand eventually. It was a terrible ship, terribly run ship, and went to the navigation school, but of course I needed to find a job. So I found a job on a salvage ship which was recovering the wreck of a passenger ship called the Wahine, which had struck a reef all over and sank in Wellington. Quite a loss of life, a very modern ship. And the Lloyd's of London, of course, the insurers appoint a salvage company to try to recover the cost. Or more importantly, if you think about it, the wreck becomes the property of Lloyd's, and the harbour people say, we don't really care who owns it, you better make it go away. So Lloyd's of London run different salvage companies around the world to do this sort of work and try to recover some of the costs. So I got a job on there, and it was I sort of enjoyed that sort of work. It was heavy equipment, heavy sailorising, and I was waiting to get a good job on deck. But I was appointed to the Explosives magazine which is this little box built on the foredeck, because we used a lot of explosives in salvage. And most of the underwater explosives, some of you may know, are sort of covered in a waxy kind of, they look a bit like an Edam cheese kind of effect. But they're the same explosives that are used, plastic explosives used at pubs to sea, but they're just made waterproof by this coating. So the salvage company were pretty tight-fisted, and they bought the cheaper one. And the solution to make it waterproof was to buy a big box of condoms. So my job, I was the chief condom roller on it. So I would sit in this explosive magazine and saw these big bits of plastic explosives into odd shapes. No need to describe it really. And then do this, and I would be up to my ankles or even higher in condom wrappers. And sometimes, I remember distinctly once the New Zealand Women's Weekly sent some female reporters out to have a look at the job. They were horrified with all these packets blown around the place. But it was a bad job, paid well, but it came to an end because my father, who had long since divorced my mother and moved on, we didn't have a very happy relationship at the best of times. All of a sudden he appeared as the salvage master, and that was going to be a problem because I kept away from him, and then eventually he realised that I was on there. No one actually woke up to it, but it was doomed from the very start. And eventually, a very long-winded story, he sacked me. He actually sacked me twice. He sacked me on another salvage job in Hong Kong on the Seawise University, which was the Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mary's in Long Beach, California. That one. Anyway, so it wasn't a good start, and I got through it all right. And eventually I did go to Hong Kong, did the next salvage job. These things were good jobs, so I paid very well, but you weren't getting the sea time necessary to go to the next grades, and I needed this desperately. So I went back onto cargo ships, general cargo ships, and some of you may remember this is before things really changed. General cargo ships used to carry cargo piece by piece. So the wharfies would load each box, each crate, each carton, each sort of thing would be lifted on board and then stowed box on box. Very long-winded process. When you got to another country, the reverse took place. For seafarers on ships, they were wonderful ships because you'd be guaranteed a week in every port. So there's plenty of time to have a good social life and have a good look around. And we quite welcomed the fact that it was a slow process to move cargo. But unfortunately, a despicable man appeared in my life from America called Malcolm McLean. Malcolm McLean, you would have heard the name. Malcolm McLean was a trucking magnate, a bit like a Lindsay Fox character, and he invented the shipping container. He developed it and invented it, and within the space of a very small amount of time, the containers dominated the trade and the business, and containers were everywhere. Of course, it was very successful. It cut down on pillage and damage, and very efficient. We used to go to the Japanese coast. We'd be a month or more on the Japanese coast doing all these ports. With containers, we'd do 5 ports in 6 days and turn around and come back. So it seriously impacted our lifestyle, and we weren't very happy with Malcolm McLean one little bit because everything changed. The ships were pretty flash, very fast. You probably see them, they tear in and out of the port here. Totally shapeless ships as far as living on board. And I thought, I'm not really enjoying this very much, I better have a look around. And around that time, the offshore oil industry was well started. It wasn't at the very start of it, but I'd heard the rumours about it. It was interesting work and it paid very well. So I decided to have a go at that. And the oil field at the time, the only one in Australia, was Bass Strait. Now I don't know if you stop to think about it, but the only place they ever find oil, and gas for that matter, is the most terrible place. There's never find oil and gas on the Gold Coast or anything like that. They find it in the North Sea or Saudi Arabia or Bass Strait or ghastly places like that. You never find it in a nice place. There is something deep and meaningful in that. Anyway, I elected to go on these ships. Now these ships were very small, extremely powerful, over-engined we would say, and very sophisticated, especially built for ocean towage and ocean work. Not like a harbour tug at all. 10 times bigger than very interesting ships. I elected to jump on board these things as a big mate, and I discovered something that I'd never discovered before in my life, and that was seasickness. I've always been on bigger ships. I never stopped to think about it, Of course, Bass Strait's a pretty ghastly place at the best of time. Man, oh man, that was a bit of a shock, because there is no feeling quite like it, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's plenty of people tout different cures for seasickness. There is only one known cure for seasickness, and that's to sit under a tree. If there's not a tree around you, you're stuck with it. Anyway, I survived the first 8 weeks. It's extremely dangerous work, working with very heavy equipment. The tow wires are 150mm in diameter steel wires. When these break, they're very dangerous things. So, after 8 weeks, my wife to be picked me up, and she said, "How'd it go?" I said, "I've never been so scared, so sick in my whole life. I don't know about this. It wasn't really such a good choice." And then she said, "Well, I don't know what's going on, but there's all this money going into the bank account." And I thought, what's going on here? When I discovered what they were paying me, I rang the office, and he said, "No, there's some more going in the next couple of days." I thought, better hang up. My wife said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I'll go back and just give it another go, see how it goes." And 20 years later, I was still banging around there doing this. So I really enjoyed the work. I went worldwide with it, and we did a lot of, not just looking after oil rigs, we did a lot of salvage work, towing ships that were broken down, or ships that were distressed, or things like that. The company was part of P&O, and they started to run the P&O Polar, which was the icebreaker. So a few of us went across and did several trips down the Antarctic with the Aurora. That wasn't very exciting, but it was something different. We did a lot of training on icebreakers up in Canada. So this job opened up a lot of doors and moved around a lot. It was quite exciting, and I was going really well. Then I got married and moved here, as I said before, and a couple of daughters came along. I discovered that daughters are very expensive things to maintain, and both academically and socially and everything else. And by living in the country, everybody seemed to need a pony or two and a horse and things like that. And so I was a bit concerned. I needed to be a bit closer to home, and so I thought I would have a go and see what sort of jobs were locally. One, of course, is the Port Phillip Sea Pilots. But back then, there was a parallel service, I guess, in the reef. Torres Strait and Barrier Reef Marine Pilots were run along similar lines to Port Phillip Sea Pilots as a private company, and they were looking for pilots. So I thought to myself, what's the choice here? Banging around Bass Strait in the middle of winter, or sitting in the Barrier Reef under a coconut tree watching the sunset? And so I elected to go there and be trained as a Torres Strait Barrier Reef Marine Pilot. Training was not difficult, but quite lengthy. They expected you to do about a year to get all the necessary licenses for different parts of the reef. The reef, as you imagine, is very intricate, very tricky, lots of regulations. And that was going pretty good. You would be on the ships for 3 days. You'd jump on them in cairns, climb up the pilot ladder, sometimes by helicopter, and it would take you the best part of 3 days to get to Torres Strait. And Thursday Island, the pilots had a big Queenslander house that had been there for 100 odd years. Beautiful place with full waiter service, with the bib and tucker, and you all sat around the table. You had to sit in your pecking order of your seniority, and the senior pilot sat at the end and passed the brandy decanter around, and we were all very full. It was pretty good fun. It all came to an end. The pilots had a bit of an argument amongst themselves, and it split into 2 camps. And I'm very sad to say that just recently it's happened to the Port Phillip Sea Pilots as well. As you probably know, they never had any opposition for 120 years or whatever it might be, same as the Torres Strait Pilots. Now you have 3 different groups, and they all oppose each other and very competitive. Exactly the same thing in the reef. The only way pilots can compete with each other, if they have the same qualifications and the same boats and helicopters to get to the ship, the only weapon you have is the price you charge. And so they kept bringing the price down until it was getting to be a ridiculous situation. And I thought, oh, here we go, I'm out of here, I might go back to driving ships. I had an interesting license which you may not have heard of, which is called an unlimited DP license, and DP stands for dynamic positioning. These are very hard licenses to get, and they're a particular type of ship which uses multi-bank computers, multi-bank GPSs, process all information, applies it to the different thrusters, and then can sit within a metre anywhere in the world, even up to a 60-knot gale, just sit on the one spot buzzing away. And then you can run remote control vehicles like robots on the seabed and recover things. Normally very deep water, we would run the robots lower down. So, and a robot can stay down there for days and days on end, not like a diver where he has to live in a habitat. So I had this license and I thought, there's no problem, had enough of this, I'll jump out and go back to driving those. I had a Norwegian master's certificate as well, and most of these ships are Norwegian, so I was pretty comfortable that I could move on. However, a couple of other pilots rang me up and they decided that they might have a go, and they invited me to join them in starting another pilot service that specialised in a very new passage through the reef, not far from the Whitsundays, which handles the very big bulk carriers that go to the coal ports. Now, we like to measure ships in tonnes and tonnage. 100,000 tonne ship would be a fair-sized container ship, of course. But the big bulk carriers, they go up to 300, 350,000 tonnes. So these things are big monsters. They're very uninteresting, simple ships. They're not very high-tech, but they're big things, and they operate with mostly with 10% of the draft under the keel, so they're very close to the bottom. We've been piloting these ships for some time, and to do these ships, we were based out of Hamilton Island. So many years ago, when Hamilton Island first started, the Torres Strait pilots were the first ones to buy an apartment there, Hibiscus 001. And so we would stay on Hamilton Island for 2 weeks at a time, which was pretty hard to take. And we had our helicopters based there, and we'd fly out, join the ship, and come back, and you do a 2-week stint there. We decided we could really make a go of this and just specialise in that and provide pilots just all the time for that. And of course, the only way to transfer is by helicopter. So we'd approach the helicopter operators. They said, "Yep, no problem." When it came time to start work, they changed their mind. They'd been under a bit of pressure from our opposition, and we suspected this might happen, and we'd have to buy a helicopter. The helicopters that work over the sea have branded somewhat differently. So it could be a Bell Jet Ranger helicopter, but it needed the code numbers that said it was an IFR or a maritime helicopter. And there was only one existed in Australia, and it wasn't for sale really because it was hanging up in the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney. It was the one that Dick Smith flew around the world, and this was exactly what we wanted. It didn't have an engine or anything in it, it looked good hanging up there. And so we approached them to see if we could buy it and replace it with another one that we could paint up the same. And that was going along pretty well until we found out many years later, once again, our opposition kind of put the block on that. So we had to buy a helicopter. And so each of us were in similar circumstances, and we had to go to our long-suffering wife and say along the lines, the house mortgage is going along nicely. We actually need a bit more on that, and to the tune of $500 million, by the way. And we eventually got there, and we got the money we needed to buy a helicopter. We couldn't afford to go and see it. We bought it in Sweden. It was a Bell American helicopter, exactly the one. We had it checked out, and then in a container and sent out to Mackay. Now, I'm sure you know, the helicopters are very exotic looking things, beautiful paint schemes, bright colours, bright plumage. We had the only beige, kind of brown, khaki looking helicopter I think ever built in the world. It was the most drab looking thing. But it was what we needed. We didn't have any money, we put a few stickers on it. But of course we needed a pilot to fly it. We couldn't fly it. And very hard to find an IFR night-rated helicopter pilot who's prepared to fly out into the Coral Sea. It's a 3-hour round trip with nowhere to land in a single-engine helicopter. It's quite a risky business. It's the longest continuous helicopter flight in the world. So to entice a pilot to come and do this, but also to live in Mackay, it's very hard. We used to go to the Aero Club on Fridays because there was free nibblies and things. We were starving to death, so this was a very important way. We got a square meal at the end of the week. And perched on the end of a bar in a very shabby state was someone we found out was a helicopter pilot. And highly qualified, but he certainly wasn't looking in good shape every Friday night that we were there. And we couldn't believe our misfortune that someone like this was around, but he obviously had a problem. One of the other pilots invited him in, and he turned out to be a lovely guy, ex-Vietnam helicopter pilot, and came in, beautifully presented, big man, had all his paperwork, and everything was fine, and I couldn't help myself. I said, "Look, Ken, do you have a problem with the drops?" And he looked quite startled, and he said, no. And it turned out that he'd become a full-time carer for his wife, who was struck down with MS. But on Fridays, the local council would send home help and they'd free him up to go and play golf. I don't play golf, but there seems to be a fair amount of alcohol involved in playing golf. So he'd go and play golf, and then he'd finish the job off at the Aero Club every Friday. So we'd only seen him every Friday. He turned out to be the most reliable guy, and we were away and running, and we really nailed the business. We provided a good service that hadn't been provided before for the big ships. I was elected to hit the road, so I flew to all the Asian countries really that had these ships and made appointments to go and see all these quite senior people and sell our wares to them, and I did pretty well. We actually sort of cornered the market for the ships there, and it cost us a bit of money, but it seemed to be well worth it. But then one day, one of our pilots, he became friendly with a Korean master, and as a gift, he took him out a huge mud crab in a plastic bucket. And the Asians love their seafood, of course, and they'd never quite seen one of these. I can't stand the look of them. They're quite scary looking things to me. But he took him this big mud crab, and the captain was overjoyed with this. You know, I mean, this is a fancy gift. And within the space of 2 weeks, he contacted every ship that came into the ports there and said, if you employ the services of a hydropilot, you get a free crab. So all the tens of thousands of dollars we'd spent on travelling around spruiking the business were totally negated. All it took was a $20 mud crab. And we had an account with the fishermen there, and we became the biggest purchasers of mud crabs in the area. Unfortunately, like all good stories, it came to an end. We had a bit of a disagreement, and this happens quite frequently in businesses. We all elected to sort of go different ways, and we sold it off, and we sold the helicopters to Grant Kenny, who was a big helicopter operator on Hamilton Island, and I was able then to go back to sea on the DP ships that I've described before. By this time, you know, the years are catching up a bit. I mean, I'm getting a bit older, and I really enjoyed the DP ships, as I said, with the Norwegians. But then one day I was driving home, I just completed one of those helicopter courses where they dunked you in the pool and took it upside down. You might have seen it on TV, and you've got to swim out. You have to do that annually. And I was driving home and the phone rang in the car, and there was this nice lady from Norway, and she said, we can't employ you anymore. And I was so surprised because I had a good name with them and everything else, and she was very upset. And she said, we're not allowed to employ you. It's a government policy in Norway that if a Norwegian is out of work, in your case as a shipmaster, then we're not allowed to employ. It's against the law to employ a foreign national when there's a person out of work. What a wonderful thing if you're a Norwegian. It wasn't much good for me. So that was it. I sent me a hat and a pen, and I was out the door. I did get some further work driving other ships, very similar ships, but in the heavy weather one day I slipped and bumped my knee quite severely. And later on I had to have a minor surgery. It didn't handicap me totally, but at the same time I had to go and do my annual medical. And the medical for a Master Class 1 is quite tough. Of course it's mainly vision and hearing and heart, all these sort of things, all the obvious things. But at the end of the survey, I call it, by the doctor, you have to get down, have to crouch down and waddle like a duck around his desk. We used to think this was such a joke, and we used to go quack, 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 and we used to call it the duck walk, you know, you've got to pass the duck walk. But of course, if you stop and think about it, it's very factual. As I found out the hard way, if you've got a crook knee, you can't do it. And I failed the duck walk. And so after a career, after 45 years as a shipmaster, dodging bullets and bombs and pirates and fires and storms, I was eventually booted out onto the beach because I couldn't waddle like a duck. It seemed like a bit of an inglorious end to things. But I'd had enough, to be quite frank with you. I did subsequently get my licences back, but I'd lost interest. The industry had changed, different people moving through, and to be quite honest, I'd had enough. And by then I was approaching 70. I've just, last month I've turned 75. I hung my licence up just 2 years ago. So it was time to go. And along the line, I'm a keen motorcyclist. I'm not a member of some nasty gang. I'm just a motorcyclist. I used to race and things like that. And I'd come across a maritime TAFE college in Lakes Entrance, a wonderful place. And I stuck my head in to say hello, and the guy said, I could really use you if you had some sort of teaching qualification. Well, I did. I had a certificate which I got as a reef pilot, as a check and training pilot. And as I told you before, it's very competitive when there are more than one pilot groups. And the best way to totally hobble your opposition is to become a check and training pilot, and every time they come up to renew their licence, you fail them. So I had this qualification which stood me good, and I became an instructor, Master 1, 2, 3, 4. Master 4 is the first one that will get people onto bigger ships. They already have a qualification that could be border force officers, water police, sometimes fishermen and things like that. And so I took a shine to this, and I'm proud to say 14 years I've been teaching there, more or less part-time, 3 times a year, and I've taught over 350 men and women, boys and girls, through Master 4. And that's the first stepping point on their career at sea. Even now I come across them. I had to hire the services of a harbour tug, and the master on the tug was one of my students. I hadn't seen him for 12 years. It's very exciting to come across these people and see how well they've progressed, and to play some part in their career. Several of my motorcycle friends had said that as a shipmaster, could I marry them and the girlfriend, because they didn't want anything fancy, just wanted someone to do the paperwork. It's a bit of a misnomer. You can't do that. A shipmaster can't do that. A Norwegian shipmaster can, but of course not in Australia. And it spurred me, just shows you how little I had to do. I did the course and became a civil celebrant. So I was one of only 3 shipmasters in Australia was a civil celebrant and could perform weddings and funerals. Funerals were better because no one ever complained. But that's digressing. Anyway, I did this a bit tongue-in-cheek, I guess, but it turned out people kind of liked the idea of being married by a shipmaster and having the captain on their wedding certificate. But with that, I've had to be careful with this, because I certainly wouldn't want to offend anyone. I don't think there's anyone in the room here. But what happened was, as I got this licence, they changed the legislation to approve same-sex marriages. And I didn't know, I still don't know why, but I became the weapon of choice for the lesbian community. They all seemed to totally embrace Captain Rob Anderson as a civil celebrant. And so I would receive probably half a dozen calls a week at some stage to go and perform these weddings, which I didn't mind doing. It didn't really worry me too much. There were some fairly frightening sights, I don't mind admitting. But I couldn't believe that I'd sort of been niche branded like this. It seemed quite strange. I haven't bothered renewing it, not for that reason, but I just tired of that. I moved on and still do several other things connected with the maritime community. There's this group called OSSA, who appear on my branding up there. OSSA is a group of Offshore Special Ships Australia. It's mainly shipmasters and ship engineers, but also management people. And one of the managers a few years ago was aware of the fact that a lot of us were retiring and getting out of the industry, but we had this incredible amount of knowledge, an incredible amount of experience, and it seemed to be a waste. So we more or less evolved that way. We provide consultancy and we do other things with the maritime museums. But one of the most important things we do is a schools program, because we came to the realisation that a lot of Year 12 students, boys and girls, have no idea about the maritime industry, not just standing on the bridge of a ship, but the maritime industry in total. And if they showed any leaning towards a career on a ship or at sea, the teachers or the careers people would steer them into the Defence Force and I'll go and join the Navy, that'll fill the bill. And they really didn't understand how commercial shipping works and who we are and the importance of commercial shipping. And Year 12 students are a very tough audience, and they're totally not interested in some crabby old sea captain like me. You can see the look of horror on their face, like, what's this guy going to go on about? So I had to come up with something that would get their attention, and I'll try it out on you, because it worked very well. And I'd start off by explaining to them the very obvious thing, that we live on an island. It's the biggest island in the world, but it's very much an island. We're not connected by a tunnel or by a bridge. Everything comes by ship. And I wave my hand around the room and I say, everything you see in this room has come on a ship. Either the raw materials or the final finished product. Pretty much everything's come on a ship at some stage, this manufacturing process. And when you go home tonight, every car, truck, bus has come on a ship. We don't manufacture those things, tragically, in Australia anymore. They all come by ship. And these ships have to move this phenomenal amount of equipment, articles, and equally so export the stuff so the country makes money. So the process of transport and shipping is a big deal. It's not just the ships, it's how you move the cargo, how it's processed by border force and customs and clearance agencies. It really does generate a lot of interest, and they really do get quite interested. We put on a bit of a magic show for them and sprinkled amongst it younger people who are doing these jobs. And one that always gets their attention is women and girls that are shipmasters and mates on ships. We have more women, girls, shipmasters pro rata than any country in the world. We have a lot of women at sea and a lot of shipmasters, and a lot of shipmasters gravitate into pilotage. So a lot of the ports throughout Australia have a lot of women pilots. And at the end of our presentation, it's always the Year 12 girls that come up proud around and all want more information. They don't realise that these opportunities exist. So it's a wonderful thing. It's approved by the Education Department. We do it Australia-wide now. I know this year I've done 24 schools. We trot along and talk to them, and it's proved to be very successful, and it's a great stepping stone for some people. And they didn't, even the teachers didn't know it existed. One of the things I was very reluctant to introduce it, but we were asked many times by the teachers and things to talk about the salary, what sort of wage structure. Young people like to know, firstly, is it an interesting job, but secondly, how much am I going to get paid? And the figures are frightening. I mean, we have to quote figures that are current, and current shipmaster, Master Class 1, still exists, has been around. He'll be on $200,000 or $300,000 a year, and he'll be getting 6 months leave a year. You get a day's work for a day's leave. So you might get 6 months in one hit, you'll do a couple of months and a couple of months off. And of course this really does make their ears prick up. It really makes the teachers' ears prick up, because all of a sudden I realise it might be a good opportunity for them too. And one of the things we describe, and it is very factual, is there's a marine cook on a big construction ship in West Australia who they get even better leave. He's currently on $300,000 a year as a chief cook. So the figures are out of all proportion. I'm not proud of them, but they are factual. And of course, it's a lot different than what you would get if you joined the Navy as an officer or a rating or something like that. So, as I said, I was reluctant to do it, but it does sort of dangle the carrot in front of them. I won't drone on anymore. That's pretty much, in a nutshell. I still drive lots of different ships. I drive the Waddle. I knew the Waddle and it was being repaired. And I stuck my head in there one day and said, I heard you might be looking for a driver, because I still had the licences. I had the port licences as well, the port exemptions. And the chairman was a lovely man, and he said, yep, we certainly could use one. And I said, well, put me on the list and I'll help you out. I said, by the way, how many are on the list? He said, well, you're in. So I'm the only one that got it at the moment. And I enjoy that notoriety. And I'm the only seafarer amongst them. They're the most hard-working group of volunteers, but they have no idea how to run a ship. I do. And so now when they see me pop out from behind the shed, they all duck for cover, they all run around. And it's taken me a couple of years. I now have them referring to it as a ship and not a boat, and they know what a deck is and not a floor. And they've nearly got to port and starboard, and doing pretty well with that. But it's a bit of fun, and today I had to take it to the other end of Docklands because the Melbourne Boat Show's on, and they kindly invited us to park it there as part of the display, which is wonderful. We're right in a very prominent position. But the Waddle, the boiler's empty at the moment because we had to take the weight out of the ship to take it up to slipway. 15 tonne of water in the boiler. So I had to hire the services of a tug and shift it up there that way. I didn't hire the service of a tug because we haven't got any money. I had to appeal to them to do it for free. So I was really out there with the fancy. And to give you an idea, I mean, they're a pretty rough bunch. They're very, very kind people. I had to go through several layers of management to eventually get to the manager of the tug. And when I got his number, I rang him on Friday and I said, look, I'm so desperate, I can't move this little tug. Oh, he said, I'd like to help you, but he said, I'm at Bathurst for the motor races and I'm very drunk. That wasn't much help. he said, ring me on Monday. And I thought, well, anyway, it was true to his word. It eventually came good. And these pretty wild-looking guys turned up this morning and took my beautiful tug up and did a wonderful job. 5 o'clock this morning, and we were there, it was all signed, sealed and delivered. So we'll be on display there in the 4 days of the boat show, which is wonderful for us because it gets us out there, people pay attention to us. That's about all I have for you. I'm sorry it's been a bit rag, a bit disorientated, but if there's time, I'm happy to defend it.
Rob has agreed before he'll be competent to take some questions. So, gentlemen, I'm sure there must be some for Rob, and there's one up the back there.
Yes, sir.
How do you get a job on the ship? Do you just go to the wharf?
But you can't now, but you could, as I found out when my old man threw me out the door, it was pretty much the case. But now, no, it's very difficult because the requirements are the very minimum. You have to do a sea safety course, which means you have to go to an institution for about a week and learn about life rafts and jumping in the sea and things like that. So it is a little bit complicated now, not that easy.
That was an amazing presentation, thank you. With all your salvage experience, what do you think they should do with the ceremony?
It's just brutal. I mean, as a kid, I used to sail my little yacht, by Morris Yacht Club and sail around here. I mean, it should have happened many years ago. Should have, and I don't know. I do know a bit about it because I do help out at Seaworks, and they've got a wonderful display there. But you'd have to assume that it's certainly pretty far gone. I'd be of the opinion that whatever you do now would be a benefit. I'd like to see it removed and even in its bedraggled state put ashore somewhere and preserved, because it's not going to be preserved there, is it? And it's such a tragedy, it's such a huge tragedy. The moment it's gone, I think, isn't it? Might as well try to resurrect. I might add that having been at the coalface with the wattle, there is no appetite for marine heritage. I mean, we've tried so hard, and there is no money available, there's no sponsorship, no grants. There is just no interest in going, unfortunately. I'd be the best maritime display at Seaworks. I think the standing by the door and say, have a little crabby old sea captain.
There's some more questions down. Have you got the microphone?
Rob, with the, did you have contracts? You seem to be able to move jobs very easily. Do you have contracts each time?
I'm careful how I cast this. I certainly don't want to be interpreted the wrong way, but I made the choice many years ago to work external to the union system. The maritime unions in Australia are very strong. I'm not going to get into whether they're good, bad or indifferent. It just didn't really suit me. So I hit the road and I work mainly overseas and I negotiate my own contract. So that's how I was able to move around so much. Over the years you build up a bit of a reputation, people get to know you and they'll call you. And Australian shipmasters and Australian Master Class 1 is considered worldwide as a high standard, high level of certification. It goes hand in hand. If you've got a good track record with the different companies, then they'll ring you up and engage you, and they don't mind paying a bit more if they're getting something good for it, But I used to just hit the road, and I've had some amazing jobs. I mean, it might sound like I frequent bars all the time, but in Singapore particularly, there's a wonderful area out near Changi Airport where there's always jobs going, and I was in there one day and bloke yelled out, "Hey, come over here, Rob, this guy's got an interesting job here," and I ended up driving a Russian hovercraft up the Amazon River with 450 tonne of drilling equipment. I'd never driven a hovercraft. Well, I have driven a little one. The guy said, "Can you drive a hovercraft?" I said, "Of course I can." Have you been up the Amazon? Yeah, plenty of time. You always say yes. And so it's opened some interesting doors. In between times, I mean, talk about flexibility, I help out and drive some of the paddle steamers on the Murray River, so that's from one extreme to another, isn't it? But yes, that's the reason why I just prefer to negotiate my own deals.
Further questions?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, really enjoyed the very good talk. Thanks, Rob. We used to live near Portland, and I have the perception from very limited experience there, but the crew coming ashore from those ships there were young. They appeared to be very poor, young Asians or whatever, and they really didn't seem to know much, and I'm sure they weren't getting huge salaries like you mentioned. And then, you know, a lot of those merchant ships are flagged by very obscure countries.
Exactly right, yeah.
And so there's another side to the merchant marine that I'd like to hear a bit more about.
There's a very brutal side to it, and it's a good observation. These ships are called flags of convenience, so ship owners can elect to go to an inferior flag, and then they can avoid all sorts of things, all sorts of standards and safety standards, and they can do whatever they like. And they're pretty brutal. Having been a reef pilot, I used to jump on plenty of these things, and you'd be horrified at some of the things you see. You know, just terrible. And that includes rates of pay, but also living standards and food and things like that. I mean, just miserable. Unfortunately, they exist because the ship owners, some ship owners are pretty hungry, especially ones from foreign countries. When I do the teaching, I get my students to have a think about the rates of pay on ships, and the question I ask them is, how much do you think, what would be, sort of saying, what would be the cheapest crew you could ever employ on a ship? And they rattle them all off. Filipinos. No, Filipinos are actually quite expensive today. Chinese, pretty cheap. They rattle them all off. The cheapest crew by a mile is Zulus. We all think of Zulus as the African native people. Zulus have been on ships for 100 years as crews on ships. A lot of them. Zulus, so then the next question is, if you pay a Filipino $10 a week, $10 US a week, how much would you pay a Zulu big man? And the answer is zero. They don't get paid. They get a meal, they get a pair of overalls, a pair of boots, one size fits all. And the next kin at home gets a coupon, and they can go to a selected store and get a bag of grain or something, you know. So they get paid nothing. They get paid zero. So it beggars the question, I mean, if the government's interested in reviving Australian shipping, how on earth will you ever compete with that sort of thing? And I do touch on this from time to time, and it's not a case of union pressure, things like that. I always point out to people that in Australia, a wonderful country, we expect a certain standard of living. Forget about the union, what the unions say. We all feel everybody should be entitled to a reasonable standard of living, hopefully a house, hopefully a decent car and kids in school. To do that, you have to generate a reasonable income. If you did that on a ship, how on earth are you ever going to compete with a foreign crew like that? You can't do it. If you recall, I'm sorry to get distracted, but if you recall that big container ship that straddled the Suez Canal and got itself stuck, the master on that was an Indian, a lot of them are out. His salary was $18,000 US a year, not $18,000 a year. That's the master. He's the highest paid one on the ship. But I hasten to say that probably when he went home to India, he would have a nice apartment, a BMW in the driveway, and 2 kids in a private school. I mean, it's commensurate to the standard of living. Unfortunately, we can't compete with that because we require people, we'd like people to do better than that, don't we? I hope that answers it. Yeah.
I think we can take 2 more. One over here.
Yes, sir.
Do many ships get lost at sea?
Yeah, a lot. Mainly bulk carriers. Bulk carriers are uninteresting ships, like a big bucket with sections filled full of iron ore or coal. Very heavily dense cargoes. And some of these ships, as they get older and they pass through different levels of flags of convenience, their standards become less and less and less. And these ships will deteriorate, the steel structure will deteriorate, and if they're not handled by, not managed by officers who have a good understanding of loading, they can get shear, hogging and sagging, we thought, they can build up racking and twisting. At Hay Point, and where most of the coal ships go from there, they were talking to the operators there, they'd say, at least 2 ships a year don't come back, they just disappear without trace. You know? So it's quite amazing. Yeah, but they're foreign ships with shabby crews, no one's interested, they wouldn't have a huge search for them and things like that, they just disappear. And when they go quick because they're full of heavy cargo, bang, they're gone. They can go in, you have a look on the internet, you see someone within minutes, they can disappear from sight. Yeah. Pretty scary, isn't it?
One more?
David,
Speaking to the vote.
thank you. Just one question with containers.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems, it seems, is containers floating just below the surface.
Yeah.
I've often wondered, why couldn't there just be some dissolving seal that in the sea would let the sea in and let the air out?
Good idea. No, that would be a good idea. Look, I don't know. Do you know that all my life at sea, I mean, I hear of these, I know they exist because I can see them on YouTube clips and things like that. I'm not doubting it doesn't happen, but in all my life at sea, I've never once seen one container floating, ever, not once. And amongst my colleagues, for a better word, I mean, not that we sit around and talk about how many containers did you see, but it never crops up because you never see them. I know it happens and it does exist, but they're not as common as a lot of people might think. If they're fully loaded containers, they usually do sink, of course, but I don't just stop to think about it. You see a container ship come to the port and it's stacked up high and everybody says, wow, you know, that must be a serious problem. All of the top levels of containers are empty. A container ship has to supply its own equivalent amount of empty containers to keep the cycle going. It's no good just keep dumping full containers because you'll run out of empty ones. So pretty much all the upper deck ones are empty. And that's how they keep the supply chains keep empty containers in the system. Does that make sense?
Right.
And when they go over the side, they're empty and they will float for sure. Guaranteed they will. But I haven't seen one yet. Might have hit one and not known it, but...
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, I know it'd be terrific if we could have
A few more. I think time is going to run out with us. Rob's going to have a drink, obviously, and he's going to have lunch with us, which is terrific. So I suggest you leave any more questions to that. Our Master Mariner, retired,
Yes.
will give our thanking address.
Thank you, President. Captain Rob,
Yes, sir.
what a ripper of a presentation.
Yes.
You kept us on the edge of that completely without notes. Completely without notes. And you covered from your very humble beginnings through salvage work, through the very dangerous offshore business. That is real seamanship down in Bass Strait that you fellows carried out. The skill of a pilot through the reef, hydrographer's passage, helicopters, just as in my pilot service, we were trying to be convinced to have helicopters, and one of the pilots in favour of helicopters said, don't be afraid if the engine fails, the helicopter won't crash, but it must land straight away. And no wonder you're in the band for the ladies' weddings. A sailor man like you with such vast experience. And Captain Anderson has declined to receive our customary gift of refreshing bottle of wine. And he wishes our Provost, through President David, to make a donation to the missions to seafarers. And he spoke about the Zulus working for nothing. Well, these crews around the world, they really do it tough, and it's a very worthwhile charity. Thank you, Captain Anderson.
Thank you. Words from Master Mariner such as...
Oh,
very flattered, thank you.
Just want to add one thing to that. I was in the shipping industry for many years. The vessel that Captain Rob mentions, the Queen Elizabeth, which went down at Hong Kong Harbour, was our ship, which was being turned to the Seawise University.
Yeah.
So I knew that well. I know the company well, and I had some dealings with what was then the Missions to Seamen down in Flinders Street. Missions to Seafarers. So a fabulous charity and a great place to visit if you've got nothing to do one day. It's a lovely place, a lovely chapel, and you'd be made more than welcome down there. So thank you again, Captain. It was a terrific treasure. Thank you very much.